when we look at the reach, one of the things that kind of comes up a lot is that obviously that's a bit more of a private metric, right? So you can't use that as a public comparison. But what we do find is that we've broken down the barrier now to start looking at it from our interactions per thousand metrics, which now we're allowing brands with our tools to actually now take a look side by side into how they're comparing themselves to the competitive marketplace. Something else that comes up a lot as far as driving brand awareness. Now, these are a few of the ones that really resonated with a lot of the clients that we work with, right? So it's page consumption. Now, this is looking at any of the video plays, the views, the clicks that you're getting. Shares are something that everybody is really focused on now. I mean, I even find a lot of the clients that we work with to actually be adding more value to shares than a like or a comment, right? So they want to actually understand, great, now I've seen it get shared and now it's gone across everybody else's friend group or platform, anything that they want to kind of look at. But I think the one that we find most folks that aren't maybe taking it into perspective is negative feedback, right? So how many of you even know what the negative feedback piece from whether like a Facebook or something like that would even detail? Anybody? So not a lot of hands, but so from a negative feedback perspective, what we're meaning with this is somebody that's actually taken it out of the newsfeed from I've clicked off to X out so that you're not showing up in my newsfeed anymore. Maybe I marked it as spam and it's just something that's going to initially not show up in my newsfeed, but overall it's going to hurt my reach, right? And it's going to hurt my affinity to you, right, if you've actually turned that off. So now if I'm not showing up in your newsfeed on a regular basis, you're not going to be engaging with my content, right? And that's where the negative feedback really, really heavily affects you. So putting out quality content is going to be very, very important when you're actually putting that out from a brand awareness perspective. The other parts that we look at now, social customer care, right? So I never call a customer care line anymore. I hate it. I'm not going to wait on hold. So now brands especially are going to be really just trying to understand, how am I getting back to folks, right? I want to know, great, I got back in less than 8 hours to my fan base, right? And now I'm actually going back and understanding I only answered 50% of the questions this month. Next month I want to do 60. So setting up the framework to understand, great, what's your goal? What are you looking to reach? We've got some industry benchmarks we've created that we can show you if you want to learn a little bit more about what are the best response times, how quickly should you be answering folks, anything along those lines. That's something that we're helping from a top level perspective for sure. And I think when we get into it, the parts that I always look at is so many brands are always asking us, how do I know what's good, right? So the goal is we don't want you to measure anything in isolation, right? So we need to look at your perspective, and sure, we need to take indirect competitors into place, but when we look at this, we also need to be thinking about the ecosystem and the newsfeed. I think that it's pretty obvious Nike is a huge company, right, that everybody's trying to strive to be the next Nike, right? But maybe they're looking at Adidas, they're looking at Pumas, they're looking at New Balance, and now they're saying, great, here's my direct competitors. But when we look at this, now maybe we wouldn't say that maybe Levi's or Walmart, maybe they're not a direct competitor, but what they are competing for is newsfeed space, right? So they're competing and they're taking up that next slot in the newsfeed. So they are becoming my competitor then. And I do want to understand how they're performing and what they're doing to actually now take my slot away from me, right? So in your perspective, it's really not looking at it in an isolated factor, only the competitor you're maybe thinking about on a regular basis or the more natural competitors that you may be seeing, but it's now taking a bit of a deeper dive into some of the other folks that are actually stealing up the newsfeed perspective as well. Oh, sorry, just have to move that one. So now when I look at this, the goal is how do I get into the newsfeed, right? So we look at this in funnel, right? So the top of the funnel, the bigger the top of the funnel, the more ROI and things that you're going to drive through all the way to the bottom, right? So obviously the goal is to get as much reach as possible. Now we're getting to the newsfeed through a few different factors, and this is through organic. We're getting this through ads and through paid pieces that we're actually driving out, or maybe I'm getting this through an influencer or somebody that posted for my brand, right? There's a lot of ways that people are getting to reach their audience, right? So the goal is to have as much reach as possible, right? You want as many people seeing your content across the board. Now, the thing and the reason that this one's in pink, the interactions, something that's publicly measured, right? Something that we can compare ourselves to the competition for. Maybe I can see, great, I had X number of interactions this month, last month I was a little bit lower, maybe a little bit higher. Now I can actually have perspective into that. Now through that reach, we can also add in the paid media, we can add in the conversions that are coming out of that, and all of those drive out ROI, right? Now again, ROI is different for every business. We'll initially have to set that part up as well when you're looking at your framework, but now it's determining all these factors to drive down through the funnel and ultimately create as much ROI as possible. I think when we look at Facebook and Twitter and all the large platforms, right, it's a an ecosystem that's changing all the time, right? Now we're showing here just through January 2013 all the way up to February of 2015, right? Now the biggest thing and the largest takeaway is that paid is growing at an astronomical rate, right? Now we find that fan bases have been built, but now you're paying to reach those fan bases, right? So we want to help understand how to do that in a much smarter way. We don't want to just have you paying for everything to reach somebody that maybe you can reach through quality content and some other pieces that I will show you in one of our case studies that we have that's coming up. But this is the goal, is ultimately to understand the paid marketplace, right? So that you can kind of create your own efficiencies through your brand. When we look at our key takeaways as far as the ROI perspective, I mean, I think it's ultimately always having an objective, right? Every brand that we talk to is different. So from my side of it, it's really just trying to really outline these so that now your team, you guys can take this away and actually showcase, here's what we've done, right? Here's the numbers that we've brought, and here's what we need to continue to drive this forward. Our biggest thing that we meet with folks is everybody seems to be the ones that want to run to be the next person on Snapchat. Great, every brand's on there, we need to be there too. But what we find is most brands are already thin from a starting perspective, and they're thinning themselves out even more when they're to add these networks that they don't ultimately have the resources to match up for. So our thing is really making sure that you actually have the resources set behind you before you just jump onto every platform to jump onto it, right? Different strategies and different objectives. I think we covered that a few times, but you're not going to drive out content on Twitter and put the same content on Facebook. I think everybody creates a little bit more unique pieces than that, and that's kind of your goal of really making sure that you're doing that. Engagement, right? I'm going to keep talking about this, and I think it's a thing that everybody's mentioned throughout the day. Creating engagement to the point where now I actually have folks coming back and interacting with my content on a regular basis. I don't want to just throw stuff up there that just to throw it up and know that that one didn't work great. We'll come back next one to do better. It's creating quality things that people want to continue to kind of interact with. And our biggest, kind of the last piece is connecting the social data to your off-social data, right? So are people on your site? Are they interacting with some of the other aspects of your world, right, your brand? Be able to bring those together and now kind of tie the dots together on social as well. I think the biggest thing when we look at Facebook, I mean, it's 1.5 billion users, right? It's the biggest resource that we have out there. It's changing every day, but to me, it's the primary source of information in the world, right? I think we saw a stat that now 70% of traffic is actually coming to Facebook through mobile, which is insane. I know that number varies and kind of changes a little bit, but that was one of the last statistics that I actually saw. And I know now, I mean, think about it on a regular basis, it's something that we're interacting with every single day. And as marketers, really trying to understand that newsfeed and how we're interacting with that in a much smarter way, right? So it's returning to the basics, right? And I think that from my perspective, I'd love to just kind of understand from the folks that are in the room, how many of you are scheduling posts on a regular basis? Is that something that you guys are all doing? Now, keep your hands up for a minute. So if you're scheduling posts, how many of you are actually scheduling posts that are going out on the 0 or on the half an hour? Is that something that you guys are doing? Because what we've kind of found is that the engagement is dropping drastically on the half and on the 30, right? So on the 0 and the 30, however you want to look at it. So what we look at is the number of brands that are just, and I don't want to say it's getting lazy, but just putting it out there at a time when everybody's putting it out there in the newsfeed at the same time. So what we found, and what you can see with this chart, is how drastically it drops off and how much more cluttered, whether it's the newsfeed or my Twitter feed actually becomes at that 0 and at that 30. So it's insane. I mean, if you would just post it at a 12-minute, I'm not going to tell you to put it at 9:34, but these are the things that people are doing that are scheduling tweets. They're the ones that are now leading in the industry, right? They're not just going out there against a bunch of competition, and again, now taking their full kind of ecosystem into it. Maybe not somebody that you would just consider your direct competitor. So I think this is a new finding that, I mean, now we were looking at it for the top 1,000 brands, but this is something that's very, very relevant across the board. Now, one of the other things that most folks really focus on is like, wow, we really crush it at 5 o'clock on Tuesdays, so I'm going to post all my stuff on 5 o'clock on Tuesdays. Wednesdays, maybe I'm a little bit stronger at 6 or 7, so I want to post on there, and this is something that our Social Bakers tool allows you to dive a bit deeper on. But when we start looking at this, Now we start saying, great, well, when is my competition posting? Should I be interacting with them? And maybe I try to go and steal their fans around, the Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Now, this is where you start to get a little bit more, and I think, into a deeper part of your framework, so that now you can go out and actually build the interactions and kind of the engagement around not only yourself and when your fans are interacting, but ultimately around your competition, right, and around the newsfeed as well. And we've also got the industry piece that I've thrown in there. But we're data nerds, and we're always trying to break stuff up and understand, great, now I'm performing really well, or maybe this brand's doing great here, but what we wanted to do is dive a bit deeper, right? So we're trying to understand now, of this panel, we built a panel of 1,000 people, right? And we're working with a lot of major brands across the world. So we wanted to understand how it worked, the post types that they're putting up, how many posts they're putting up, and then the percentage of the paid versus the organic, right? So some pretty top-level data, but now understanding this at a much kind of bigger scope. So what we found, and where this kind of all came together now, is really diving more into the newsfeed insights, right, and the optimization. And what we found, and where we started to talk with folks about this, is looking at it in an SEO perspective versus some of the other ways that people now are kind of driving that out. Like, is it I'm going and looking for things directly on the internet, which is really just driving me out one search and giving me one return, right? And that's where it's a little bit different. Where when we're looking at this, we're looking at the newsfeed optimization against that, and now I'm saying that, great, there's 1 billion people, I'm looking at literally 1 billion different feeds, right? So now I'm trying to understand how this is all kind of working and how this is coming into play. So from our perspective now, it's really just trying to understand, great, what do I want to put into that feed, right? How do I want to drive the engagement? How do I want to get people kind of interactive with my content? When we looked at this, some of the deeper findings that we started to look at was now about 9 to 10% of those posts were actually promoted, right, overall. Now this is when we're looking at those 1,000 users, right? We're looking at this very, very high level of organic strategies, right? And I think that this is pretty standard across the board. But when we started to dive even more, we were looking at this now and looking at user posts versus page posts. And now what we were trying to understand is, great, how much is actually out there? What's kind of going on in the feed, right? What's the clutter look like? What's the noise look like? Now, we broke this out, and now on an industry average, looking at the full of Facebook, we're looking at now 2 to 3% of the actual news feeds are being promoted, right? Really, really small percentage, but when we look at that, it's actually driving a lot of the views. We'll show you, and we'll be able to now kind of break that out into how that looks. But the thing that starts really throwing things off is that, great, there's a lot of page posts that are, not a lot that are being promoted, but now I'm seeing at least one every time I'm getting onto Facebook, right? Because it's the first one that's delivered at the top of my newsfeed. So now, as you can see here, the position becomes even more kind of cluttered, right? And now maybe I'm looking at it as I scroll down a little bit more. Maybe I've got another one in my 11. Maybe I've got another promoted ad kind of down in my 19th. And now, as I continue to scroll down, right, I'm starting to understand what it's looking like as a whole, right, and what my newsfeed is kind of looking like, because there's a lot of data there, and there's a lot of kind of content out there that everybody's just creating and crafting. And when we look at this, the interactions vary by category. Now, far and above, we're seeing the media like a BuzzFeed of the world, or Mashable, or anybody like that really is breaking through and creating content that now is also inspirational, right? It's stuff that a lot of folks are actually striving to become the next BuzzFeed, the next Mashable, anybody else that you think of, TechCrunch, Business Insider. These media brands are really dwarfing a lot of the large level brands as far as maybe like entertainment, sports. These are the folks that are just getting interactions and engagement on a regular basis, right? And we're looking at really, really high levels of interactions overall. Now, when we started kind of breaking this out, looking at it, this is our instant distribution, right? So now this is the number of actual posts that are going to be seen by somebody that is on Facebook, right? So obviously, every time you're on there, you're going to see one, right? So anytime you go on, it's going to show you that one. And now we can see where everybody starts to trail off. Maybe I only scrolled a little bit, but we can see where it picks back up. It's like, you've seen the 20th, you're going to be on there for a while, and that's, again, that thing that just reels you in, right? So you're getting that content that's now a little bit further down your news feed, and you want to be the brand that puts that out there and keeps people there, right? Keeps people interacting with it, because all that's going to do is drive your engagement and continue to drive your interactions people focused on now, hopefully coming back to yours on a more regular basis. Now, something that a lot of this data has now led us to do is we wanted to create a more real-time view, right, at Social Bakers. A lot of the brands that we work with have these large social media command centers. They have these screens that are actually showing me, great, I've got X likes, or here's my engagement, everything at a really high level. But what we weren't understanding is what the actual overall feed looked like and how noisy it was, right? So what this screen actually does, so you're going to see the top perspective where all the graphs are. This screen actually lets me see the top 30 posts that are going on in my group of pages that I decide to look at. Now this is looking at global brands or pages, right? Now this is looking at everything. We've got these also set up for maybe it's a financial industries perspective, telecom, anything that we want to break it out. It's really simple to do. The best part is that now I can see what those top 30 pages are doing, right, from a performance perspective. It's going to tell me which ones were paid or which ones were organic. Green is in organic, paid is in blue, right? So now when I come to the right rail, it actually allows me to scroll, and if I click on one of those, I can actually go see what it looks like natively on Facebook. So it's allowing me to kind of go out and actually now see what it looks like natively. But where I find this to be really interesting, and I'm going to start with the middle part where it says interactions there. So what I get with this is I can see the total number of posts for each of these pages. And now I can see the total number of interactions for those pages. So what I can see is there was 31,000 posts, right? Sounds insane. Now this is over a 36-hour period. Now it's going to tell me that of those posts, we had 63.7 million interactions. The top 30 accounted for 10.5 million of those interactions, right? And now what we can see there is this huge scope of how a small number of posts over that 36-hour period controls the majority of the newsfeed and the majority of interactions that we can see out there. So this is helping us understand where the clutter is. This is called our newsfeed pulse. The part that I'd like to always end with is being able to show where those posts are distributed from a paid versus an organic perspective, and that's a little wheel that you can see. But the part on the bottom left is the thing that's, I think, been most interesting to all the brands that I work with, right? This is actually helping them now get a little bit more predictive technology into this, right? So we're taking all the data points of how many posts are actually going out there, and you can see the last 24 hours, essentially, right? So I can see what was happening in the last 17, all the way down to 12, 6, but now I'm actually predicting what's going to be happening over the next 6 hours. So that'll tell me, should I be waiting to post, right? Am I going to be going up against hundreds and hundreds of posts in the newsfeed? This gives me a much tighter perspective into how that's actually going to look. So this is one of the coolest things we're actually working on now. It updates live. I think it's something that is going to be in most everybody's social, whether it's a room or maybe just sitting on my computer, as I want to kind of understand what the marketplace is looking like. I think the last, and some of the other parts that I wanted to jump into is brands that are becoming a lot smarter with social, right? So from a just customer service perspective, right? Brands like H&M, some of the folks that we work with now, they're looking at how do I take social and how do I turn it into cool products, right, that people actually want to buy and interact with. So now what we've seen is H&M is taking feedback, right, on some of their social posts. They're putting a little feeler out there to say, great, do I want to make this pink shirt? Do I want it to be white or do I want it to be green? And now, based on feedback that they're receiving on each of these, they're actually driving and putting those into production. It's taking a couple weeks to turn that around. So it's pretty insane how social is actually affecting that. Brings me into one of my favorites, right? Shoe Lovers is a partner of ours. We've been working with them for a little while. They're one of the most interesting brands that maybe you've heard of, maybe you haven't. If you haven't, you're going to remember them. But what they've done is they went from having no fans to over 1 million in less than a year. It was insane, crazy growth. They're over 34 million now, right? So this is a brand that literally is only using Facebook. They're paying for nothing, right? So you would think that a brand like this would have to be paying for feeds and space in the feed. They're not paying for anything. Now, what they're doing is completely different. They've built their business on passion, right? So now, I probably wouldn't wear any of these shoes, but there's a way that you can now start to feel this out and see who would, right? So when we're looking at this, these shoes alone are getting 30,000 likes, maybe it's 170, 244,000, insane numbers. Now, Shoe Lovers is becoming even smarter, right? Because they're taking that data and now they're using this to implement new shoes and create these, but a very limited number of them, right? So what they're doing is, based on the likes and based on the interactions that they're receiving, they're putting these shoes into production, right? And now they're putting them into a pre-production where they don't actually start making them until a certain number of purchases have actually happened. So they're being really smart on the supply and demand that's driven out of social, right? So within a couple weeks, they're actually turning around these shoes based on the number of sales that they're getting from the pre-perspective. And now they're driving that out to a very limited audience, right? So hundreds of shoes versus thousands that everybody are wearing. You get to wear this unique pair of shoes that you've connected with the brand, and you feel like you've almost created them, right? So now they're building that passion and really kind of driving it forward. So what's funny is we actually had to Photoshop this because their interactions are so huge that when we looked at them against the fashion global benchmark that we've got, you didn't even see it. Like, it was not there. It was missing, basically. So they're dwarfing them completely. Now, what we're seeing with this is that their interactions are insane, right? They're seeing now over 200 million interactions on a month-to-month basis, which I know sounds unreal, but it's happening on a regular basis for them. It's insane. So now what they're looking at is where their monthly growth was. You can see how they've kind of started from 2012 up to through 2013. They're one of the biggest in the industry, and there's somebody that the data that they have and the fact that they pay for literally nothing to create these shoes, which aren't that expensive, I don't think, to make, but are ultimately driving them out via social. I think it's just such a smart way that they're actually running their business. I think a few of the things and the key takeaways, right, that I always look at, and if I was sitting in your chairs as a marketer, is really understanding Facebook, right? Understanding how the newsfeed works. It's important. Understanding the affinity to your fans, when you're showing up, if they're showing up more, how are you going to change those behaviors, right? And this is something that we help people with on a day-to-day basis. How will you structure your teams around it as well? I mean, I think these are the big things when we look at this. This is by far and away the number one thing, right? Is just trying to have this understanding as a marketer that you want to be able to now actually go out and showcase to your boss that I'm crushing it. Here's what I'm doing. I want to be the next shoe lover. We're going to be the next big brand on the internet, right? And I think one thing, I don't wear this mustache all the time. I wanted to just throw this out there. Pretty ridiculous shaving this morning, but Movember, they're a partner of ours as well. Big fan. But this is, you can join our team. We've got a big group kind of going. I think there's 10 of us right now. It's one of the things that I've worked on year to year. Something that I just have a really good time with, and wanted to just throw that into the mix. So if you guys want to be a part of our team or join on that, grow the mustache. It's always really good. But I just appreciate everybody coming out today. I think I'm going to leave some time if there's questions, if you guys want to ask for those. The other thing I want to mention is that myself, I've got Ryan from our team here, Julia and Anthony as well, who are sitting up front. We're going to be here for the whole week hanging out. So if there's questions, if there's things that we can help you with building your framework, we would love to be able to sit down and just talk to you a little bit more. It's something that we've kind of grown really fond of, and I think now we're actually looking forward to continuing to help brands as they kind of continue to grow their social aspects. So that's all I had. If anybody has any questions, I can take those. Yeah. Sorry.
So you talked a little bit about Facebook. I know especially with just kind of the way that it's shifting to more of a pay-to-play platform, and there's all these different targeting capabilities, whether that's carousel ads, dark posts, geo-targeted content. How do you use competitor data to remain competitive within those tactics?
Yeah. So I think it's really taking, again, as I kind of went through some of the slides, it's really understanding your scope, right, and what you want to do first. Creating and understanding who your competitors are, right, but then ultimately also the folks outside of your natural competitive state, right, because I think people get stuck on, I'm AT&T and I compete with, Verizon and not, kind of thinking about it from a bigger scope. So I think when you look at it, understanding how you can compare yourself publicly, right, is the biggest piece to start with. And then, because you're not able to actually see dark posts, you're not able to actually do that through the tools. But I think it's ultimately setting it up to set yourself up for success first, right, and understand how am I building it, what am I doing from my own perspective, and now how do I want to drive content out that people want to come back and continue to engage with, right? I think that's the goal when we work with anybody. Sorry. I feel like there's...
I guess you've mostly been talking about consumer brands. What would this differ for B2B brands? Or any of these tactics? Would you change any way to look at these metrics or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's each industry is very different, right? I think when we look at it, obviously, we're looking at some of the consumer sides of it a little bit more in these, kind of examples, but we do work with some B2B companies as well. And I think that everybody's got a different perspective. Like L'Oreal, who uses it for internal, they're trying to really grow their actual group of workers, right, that are quality. when we look at it from a B2B perspective, the other thing is now trying to compete internally and have internal champions that you're working with. So a lot of the screens and some of the custom stuff that we build actually is just to build internal awareness so that now me as an employee, I can go out there and promote the brand, but promote it in a smarter way, right? I'm not just putting a bunch of junk out on my Twitter or my Facebook and throwing things out there. I can actually be the employee that is going out and now engaging my own audience, right? And becoming almost that brand ambassador internally. But when we look at it from the B2B perspective, it's really kind of more identifying the specific KPIs of where you guys are looking to really reach, right? The audience that you're kind of going after, and then just focusing on those to now drive and report on them. Oops, sorry, I think there's one over here. Or, yeah.
Just going off of what you just said, what platform do you see companies using internally to let their employees promote the brand?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a lot of companies that we create the social framework for, right, which I mentioned, but it's, I'm trying to think of, it's Jumeirah, right, the hotel group that we work with, where we actually created a whole social playbook for them, where when you came into the company, you literally sit down and as a part of your learnings of, great, how am I going to work for the company? I'm actually learning social as well, right, and how do I actually talk about the company? So I have my own voice, but the company is actually now showcasing, here's how we would like to be represented, here's what we would like to do, and now I'm not walking into a blind, right, and hoping somebody talks well about the company. We've actually now kind of crafted the voice and helped them. So that's another part of something that we actually do through some of our framework and what we build for a lot of the companies that we partner with.
Is there any playbook online just to look at, like a generic playbook?
I mean, I think our site is a big portal of information, right, when I look at it. So most people are usually trying to figure out, there's so much data there on our website, right, whether it's looking at how you're comparing from a fan perspective or growth perspective, engagement. There's a ton of free stats there. And our blog is a huge resource for a lot of that stuff. So yeah, we can definitely talk after if you'd like, but there's some really, really nice free resources that we offer on our site for sure.
Hi. You talked a little bit about comparing yourself to competitors when you were mentioning getting to the top of the newsfeed. And you mentioned public data, getting a hold of public data. And I was wondering what kind of, can you talk a little bit more about that as far as getting, I think you mentioned interactions.
Yeah. So when we look at it, I mean, Facebook specifically has 3 APIs that we're pulling data from, right? This is our tool specifically that I'm talking about. So when we're looking at this, we're pulling from 3 separate APIs, right, from just Facebook alone. When we look at Facebook and the KPIs that we can track from, just from the public side of it, there's about 30 to 35, right? Now when we take in the side of it that's the private, which is what you're the administrators of the page, we can add in usually another 20 to 30 metrics as well. So we're looking, there's so many different metrics you can track yourself by, publicly understanding how you're comparing to your competition, right? Now whether this is the direct competitors or the outside of the, kind of the ecosystem competitors that you're tracking yourself against, the best way now is to be able to say, great, interactions, right? That's a metric that's publicly accessible for anybody, right? So now I can see how am I comparing against my industry or maybe against a full benchmark of that industry. But ultimately, being able to look at those numbers, I can see obviously the likes, comments, or shares for anybody that I want, the engagement, stuff like that, where now I actually have the ability to understand, am I a leader in the industry? Am I not? Do I need to step it up? Do I need to be able to see what are they putting out from a content perspective? That's how I can actually now do that from a public perspective and have the data kind of readily available. Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you guys. I mean, I think that, like again, we'd love to talk to anybody that's here. If you guys have more questions, I think from our perspective, each case is kind of a little bit different, right? No matter what brand it is that we're working with or looking at. So pick our brains, because whether it's us or whether it's one of our other, coworkers, I think there's at least an industry that we cover across the board, right, for everybody. So we would love to be able to give you some feedback into how to take best practices from some of the other partners maybe that we work with in that specific industry and now drive that forward for yourself. So we're going to be here all week. Hopefully we get to talk to some more of you guys. Thank you.